This is the Montana Outdoor Podcast, brought to you in part by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. And by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, get ready for more fascinating topics and the most interesting people you will ever find in Montana's great outdoors. We offer new podcasts most every Saturday. You can get a link to these podcasts by going to our website, montanooutdoor.com, or by going to our Facebook page, or just send an email to downrigger at montanooutdoor.com and say send a link to my email. It's that simple. Now let's head out with your host, Downrigger Dale, and see what's going on in Montana's great outdoors.
Thank you very much, Manny, for that wonderful introduction as always. And as he said, I am Downrigger Dale with the Montana Outdoor Podcast. Thanks so much for all of you for joining in. And today, I thought we would spend some time getting to know one of this program, and also a lot of you listen to the Montana Outdoor Radio Show, one of our favorite game wardens who's joined us on the Montana Outdoor Radio Show a lot, and also on our local show. Some of you do listen to that we do in Missoula, which, of course, you find on montanooutdoor.com. So a lot of you listen to that as well. And Aaron's joined us on that show. His name is Aaron Berg. He's a sergeant with the FWP, that's the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He's a game warden. And welcome to the podcast, Aaron. Thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, how long have you been a game warden?
I've been a game warden for right around 20 years.
20 years. Okay. And what made you decide, okay, I want to be a game warden? This is what I want to do.
Well, I've always enjoyed fishing, hunting, and all that, which is pretty typical of game wardens. You know, I grew up in a family that had car businesses, but you know, I always had aspirations to do something outdoors, whether it be biological or as a game warden. And I guess the straw that broke the camel's back was when we sold our businesses, and I just decided, well, I guess that's not going to work out. So I'm headed to college to pursue my dreams of doing this.
So that was your dad's car dealerships. Where were they located?
We had one in Livingston. That was the last one we owned in Montana. And then we also had one in Lewistown years ago as well. Yeah.
All right. So you traded in your car dealership deal to pursue a very noble profession in the Montana's outdoors. How long did it take you to go from, okay, I'm graduating and from college, and now it's time to get involved in the outdoors? Was it always you wanted to be a game warden, or by the time you got through college, were you still wondering what part of the outdoors you wanted to be in?
I knew in college I wanted to be a game warden because I ended up getting my degree in recreation management.
Oh, okay.
I enjoyed the sociological aspect of why people recreate and understanding why they enjoy recreating and what the purpose of it is. Growing up in Montana, I didn't really need to get a wildlife biology degree because I already knew about the animals and the landscape and how things worked. So I went with the more sociological aspect of the degree side.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit about the process of becoming a game warden. And the reason that I want to get into that is we are going to talk a bit about the shortage that Montana has of game wardens, because hopefully some of you are going to listen to this, and maybe one of your kids or maybe you yourself that are listening. We do have a lot of young folks that listen and say, you know what, I think I want to have a career as a game warden. So let's talk a bit about that. So how does one go about being a game warden? This would have been about 20 years ago. So what were the steps you had to take to become a game warden?
So once you get your degree, you join in on what we call a general hire process. Submitting an application. You had to do, if you're selected, you had to do some writing of some questions, basically supplemental questions or whatever. If you're selected again, you had to do, an in-person interview. And then you also had to complete a meeting with a psychologist, and you also had to complete the physical test. It's basically the same now. The physical test is different, and some of the testing requirements are different, but the process basically is almost a year by the time you get hired, and then go through all of your field training and go to the law enforcement academy. It's about a year.
Wow. Okay. So, first you have to just see if they want you. So, once they decided, okay, this Aaron Berg fella is going to be a good fit for us, then the academy. Now, is that a separate academy just for game wardens, or is it all part of all law enforcement for Montana?
Yeah, in Montana, it's basically all law enforcement. It's 3 months, 12 weeks, and you learn legal knowledge. You got to do all the driving, the firearms, the defensive tactics, all the basic stuff that most law enforcement academies go through.
Mm-hmm. And when you were getting involved and saying, okay, I'm going to be this game warden and all that, when did you find out that being a game warden, and those of you who are listening may not know this, but being a game warden is a fairly dangerous profession. I think some people think of a game warden, oh, they're like a park ranger. Well, no, you're a law enforcement officer. You're not like a campground host or something. I mean, you're a full-on law enforcement officer. And the thing that I've always admired about you guys is, typically, and nothing against the rest of law enforcement, but for example, in a regular Montana city, there's a law enforcement officer can call for backup and make sure that they've got proper backup. Well, for a game warden, that's usually not possible. I mean, you're covering a tremendous amount of stuff. When did you realize that this is serious stuff here?
The first day on the job alone. You recognize that you're by yourself and you have to use a lot of communication skills and utilize your personality and demeanor and how you present yourself to the public. That makes a huge difference when being alone out there and working with people. I mean, we're not just out doing enforcement action all the time. A big majority of our job is just doing administrative checks, checking licenses and making sure people have the right stuff to be out there doing what they're doing. And so, a lot of that stuff is pretty benign, but you definitely got to be ready for when someone doesn't like the situation that you're working with. And being out there alone can be a little nerve-wracking at times. Yeah.
Well, you think about it for a regular law enforcement officer, by and large, not everybody that you come in contact is going to be armed. Whereas with a game warden, pretty much, I wouldn't say everybody, but most people are armed.
Yeah.
Because they're hunting.
Yeah, anymore, especially during hunting season, of course, that's a given. But, even in the summer when people are out fishing streams that are bear heavy, you'll have anglers carrying firearms for protection and hikers. And there's a lot of people carrying firearms in Montana. It's just not that uncommon.
Right. Well, which I fully support. I carry as well. So let's talk about that first day. What was that like? The first day that they said, okay, Aaron, here's your vehicle and you're off. What tell us about what you experienced in that first day.
I am trying to remember what I was doing that day.
Were you a little nervous?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
I mean, you just went through this, very intensive training. to do what you're doing professionally and have a career of it. And here you are cut loose on your own in a patrol vehicle out in the middle of nowhere talking to people. And it was definitely a little nerve-wracking. And early on in your career, when you're actually coming across violations and you have to take enforcement actions, definitely, it's a little nerve-wracking. But you get to a point where, and I'm not going to say you're complacent, but you just get more comfortable with, how to react to certain violations, because they're all different, even though a violation may be the same citation, but each situation's always different, and you just got to know how to react in different situations, whether it was an accident or it was intentional or what have you. So,
do you remember the first citation you wrote?
I do. Yes, I do.
What was it for?
Myself and my captain, I was working in Region 6 out of Glasgow. I was the Fort Peck warden, so I worked Macomb County.
Okay.
And the first citation I wrote was for a young man who was home that summer from college. And him and his buddies were out driving around in a stubble field, tearing around and having a good old time. And they ran over a deer.
Oh, no.
And so, funny enough, you know how the wind blows out there.
Yeah.
Both doors must have been opened, and the envelope with his name and address with his voter registration card had blown out of his vehicle.
Way.
And it was caught in the sagebrush a couple hundred yards away, and I found it, and that's what led me to catching the guy. But that was my first citation I ever wrote. Somebody killing a deer intentionally with their vehicle. So
they intentionally.
Oh yeah,
did
they were chasing it through the stubble, tearing around.
Oh man. So what did you say to him?
Well, I'm trying to remember how the interview went. He was a pretty nice young man once we started talking to him. He was honest about what had happened. They were being kids and out doing things they shouldn't have been doing, and things got a little out of hand. And I think the deer juked when he thought it was going to jive, and he juked the same way, and things just kind of went down the...
So he pretty much came clean with you and said, "Oh, yeah, that was me." And so then you wrote him a citation for that, huh?
I did. Yeah. I can't exactly remember what I wrote him, if it was for killing the deer out of season or what, but the deer was wasted. It was left in the field. And
that's another citation right there. Right?
Yeah. And they were trespassing, tearing around off road on somebody's, wheat stubble. But yeah, I cut him some breaks. He was honest with me, and so he paid a fine and lost his privileges for a couple years, and paid his dues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll get into a little bit of history here with game wardens. And in fact, on the FWP site, folks that are listening to this podcast, they have a pretty good explanation of what game wardens do and some nice history on it. But the first game warden was it W.F. Scott, right?
Yes.
I think it was 1901.
Yeah, it was real early 1900s.
Yeah, and he became, he was the first and only employee for, I don't think, it wasn't called the FWP back then, but he was the first and only employee, and he was a game warden for the entire state.
Yeah, he was.
Montana.
Yep.
I remember that they had, when I was reading about this, the legislature first said, well, every county can hire a warden. And what they found, for whatever reason, is a lot of those counties, probably to save money, didn't hire them.
Yeah.
And so that's when the state decided, and the legislature decided, okay, we need to do this. So they hired one, and then he eventually was able to hire on some more of them, and coined the phrase that still is used by the wardens, which is how does it go? To enforce the the law without fear or favor, or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's how it all began. How many wardens do we have now in the state of Montana?
So our division as a whole, I believe, is at 119. However, I think it's like in the mid 70s that are actual field wardens, what we would call a field personnel that have districts and patrol them, and then add the geez, I guess we have 17 or 18 sergeant positions now, whatever it is. And, we get out in the field still a bunch too. So add those to it. And, add to the fact that we have districts that are larger than the state of Delaware. One person's patrolling them, and how many conservation officers do they have in Delaware? Between the fisheries and the wildlife, I'm sure it's in the hundreds.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's it's a daunting task at times.
Mm-hmm. So I assume. Are you guys hiring now? Are you looking for more wardens right now?
Yeah, we've been recruiting quite a bit. When I first started, there'd be 150, 200 people that would apply for 2 positions. Wow. And it seems like now, which we're getting some people applying, but now it seems like a couple times a year, we're doing general hires for 10 or 12 positions. Mm-hmm. And so that tells you, the difference from 20 years ago to now.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you listening that, maybe you have someone in your family that you think would be interested, or maybe yourself is interested, I'm going to put a link in the podcast description that will get you to more information and give you some information on how to look into the career and to get after it. Now, college degree is required, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a specific degree you have to have?
So it used to just be mainly fish and wildlife biology or management, or some natural resource related, but we are accepting, criminal justice, sociology degrees. There are some, police administration degrees, but we're also accepting other degrees with some related experience, as long as you kind of have a inkling of, what the outdoors are about, and hunting and fishing and such. But, but yeah, the 4-year bachelor's degree is a requirement.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the other requirements that are out there now that you have to have?
Well, again, you got to go through a physical assessment. You got to run an obstacle course to get hired. So you got to be in, reasonable shape. Physical ability wise, we're hiking into kill sites and dragging out animals and lifting animals into the back of the truck. So there's that. And there's some vision requirements, I believe. Mm-hmm. You have to be correctable down to 20/20. Just a lot of basic, law enforcement requirements.
Okay. Well, so I'll get those links for you folks that are interested, and why not? It's a rewarding career, and one that certainly would help these folks out there. So we got some good background on you as far as getting involved and all that. Now let's talk a bit about what you guys are up to these days, and kind of I want to help inform our listeners as far as how they can better be prepared out there. So we're going to get into a lot of that as far as what you look for as a game warden, and some of the common mistakes that people make and all that. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll start getting into some of the nuts and bolts, and hopefully give you hunters and fishermen out there some good knowledge, so that you get to talk about hunting and fishing, and not about why you need to go to court because you were hunting and fishing. That's coming up right after this. It just seems like yesterday we were sitting in the heat going, "Ooh, this is a hot summer. What are we going to do?" And we're worried about forest fires and all that. But now, all of a sudden, you feel that little tinge in the air, the crispness, and it won't be long, folks. The snow is going to fly. this is the time. If you've ever thought about getting a snowplow so you can get that driveway of yours plowed, or let's say you own a business. A lot of you need to plow that out. You can save a ton of money plowing it yourself. And I kind of think it's fun. I enjoy doing it. But the reason I'm talking about all this is Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer is your Boss snowplow dealer. And Boss snowplows, I think, has just now taken it to a whole another level. They are the snowplow that you want to have. They can do so many different things. And the great thing about Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer is they have a full service department. They can install it. They can take you through it, show you how to operate your Boss snowplow. They can help you get financing. They have the parts. They have everything. This isn't something where, you get a snowplow and then you have problems with it or whatever, and the people that sold it to you, that's all they do is sell it. They don't know anything. Not with Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. They not only do they carry the best snowplowers you can get, Boss snowplows, but they do everything from helping you pick the right one all the way through to the service after sale and all that. So get a hold of my friends at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Now, you can go see them in person in Missoula, Montana, 5680 Expressway in Missoula. Also, you can, of course, give them a call. They'd love to talk to you there. Their phone number, 406-549-4243. Or one of my favorite ways to take a look at everything they have is just go online, rmtte.com, rmtte.com, Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Be ready for winter this year with a Boss snowplow and check out all their inventory and everything else. You're going to like dealing with these folks. Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. And we are back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast. Downrigger Dale here with Sergeant Aaron Berg, Warden for the Montana Fishing Game, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, to be more exact. So, Aaron, let's start with fishing. What would you say are some of the most common mistakes? And I assume most of the time that besides just checking people, because that's what you do, but most of the time when someone gets a citation or has you knocking on their door or whatever, is it mostly people just making mistakes that, oh, gee, I didn't know that?
Yeah, I would say the most common mistake is just not reading the regulations.
Yeah.
Because every body of water is different. One area you might be able to catch and keep bull trout, and in other areas you can't.
Right.
Some areas you can catch and keep cutthroat, and other areas you can't. Some areas might allow bait fishing during certain times of the year, and some might be artificial lure stuff, only. So you got to read the regulations to know what body of water you're fishing, what you can catch and keep, what you can use as far as tackle, and that sort of thing. And of course, the most common bit of knowledge is you got to have a fishing license to go.
Yeah. And you know what? That can be one that you can forget. I am guilty of that one. Thank God I hadn't even put the rod in the water, but I was out with my fishing buddy, the captain of the Montana Outdoor Radio Show. We were on Fort Peck, and we were going across the lake, heading to one of our favorite walleye holes on Fort Peck. And as we're zipping across the water, he looked at me and he said, "You got your fishing license, right?" And he went, and I'm thinking, God, and it was right, the beginning, right early, and ice had come off the water. I went, you know what? I haven't got one yet. And we happened to be, which is not real usual on Fort Peck, but we were still close enough that we were in cell service. And thank goodness nowadays you can do it right online. And so there I was. I got my fishing license right online, so we didn't have to go back and get that. But that I'm sure is a pretty common one. Where I mean, does that happen where you just got to check somebody now and then, and they go, "Oh crap, I didn't get a license."
Yeah, especially with our license year kind of having an odd date when it starts. You know, our license year ends the end of February and
Right.
restarts on March 1st. And, you know, the beginning of March, people are itching to get out and fish the rivers and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's not uncommon to see somebody that just blanked it and totally forgot. But, you know, you can look up their history and see that they've gotten one every year. But we've also had people get online when they see us pull up and try and buy one real quick. And you go and check it, and it shows the date of purchase and
Right,
the
sure
exact
does.
time. So
Yeah.
I knew he bought it, 4 minutes ago. Yeah, it's kind of funny with the online stuff, but yeah, that's definitely like the base thing you need before you go fishing, and
Sure.
most people know.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, really one of the great rules of thumb that I, after my stupid moment of not getting a license, that I never forgot that, and then I now just kind of get in the habit of, before I go out, even if it's a place that I've gone, that first day that I'm going to go out, I just do a quick check of the regulations, because they change a lot, and it's our obligation to know that. It's not like, they send a memo out to everybody. Certainly the FWP tries to publicize when they've made a rule change. Would that be a real common one with people, is they just space out that the rules indeed have changed?
Yeah, so like with our general hunting regulations, our deer, elk, antelope regulations, they're on a 2-year cycle for the season setting and all that, and so they do change. They can change every year, but most likely big changes come every 2 years, kind of like a couple years ago, or was it last year, when we combined a bunch of hunting districts.
Right.
And so the hunting district boundaries were different, or the hunting districts themselves were larger and or a different number. And so, it took people some getting used to, because one year they were hunting district, 2 whatever, and now it's totally different.
Right.
So yeah, you definitely got to make sure and read them before you go out.
Well, and back to finishing up on the fishing here. One of the things that I got several questions on, and it was kind of interesting because I get lots of emails from those of you that listen to this podcast, but also to our statewide radio show, and that was about bait. And this little debate came up with several people that said, no, you can use, and this happened to be on Fort Peck, that, everybody's trying to find that secret thing to be able to catch those great big king salmon on Fort Peck, which is pretty cool. If you've never done it, folks, go try it. But and their favorite food is the Cisco. And so people are saying, well, you know what you ought to do is get some of those Cisco and use those as bait, since that's your favorite thing. Well, you can't do that. And the rule is that if it's a sport fish, it can't be bait. Am I correct there?
A game fish. Yes.
A game fish. Yeah.
Yep.
Game fish.
Yeah. If it's defined as a game fish, it cannot be used.
So it was an interesting debate, but then somebody used a little caveat, said, okay, yeah, I know that, but I'm using Cisco that came from the inside of a salmon. They ate the Cisco. And when I gutted the salmon, there's some Cisco. So I'm putting that in my bait cup or whatever. Can't do that.
No.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I've had more arguments about that, that it is what it is. It doesn't change because it got digested.
Yeah, no, it's
partially digested.
it's a game fish.
Right.
I mean, they could, there's other fish you can use parts and pieces of, but you cannot use any game fish whole. in
Right.
any form or fashion to fish for other fish.
And so one of the things that I think people need to think about is when you read some of these regulations, and no offense, but some of them are very confusing. If you're not sure, you can call any FWP office and they'll get you clarification. Right?
Absolutely. Our front office staff, they're so knowledgeable with all the regulations. They take hundreds and hundreds of calls a day. You know, whatever region you're in, call that regional headquarters.
Sure.
And ask whatever question you got. And if they can't answer it, they usually will ship you to a biologist or a game warden that can probably answer that question.
Now, how do you guys keep up with all that? Because when we just in fishing alone, there's so many different areas and even areas within a region that are different from this lake or this stream and all that. How do you keep up with all that?
Well, I mean, once you've been doing it for a number of years, you kind of memorize some, a lot of them. But with changes, I mean, we just like everybody else, you just got to keep studying all the time and making sure, hey, I'm working this area today. Make sure you know what you're looking for. I mean, because that's how we detect violations. You got to know what you're looking for, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, nobody can memorize all of that stuff. It's impossible.
So, yeah, just check. When in doubt, first of all, don't do it till you know. Second of all, get that clarification. When you come across someone, and we'll be on fishing here for now, and then we're going to shift to hunting and spend a lot of time on hunting. But when you get into the coming up to somebody's fishing, they've broken a rule, but they just didn't understand it. Didn't realize it changed. What do you do there? I mean, do you have some discretion to say, I'm going to give you a warning, or do you have to always write that citation?
No, you don't always have to write that citation. I mean, we write a fair amount of written warnings as well. It just, like I said earlier, it depends on the situation and how honest the person's being. And, was it truly a mistake, or, are they just using that as an excuse? It's our job to decipher kind of where we're at in the conversation.
Sure.
But ignorance and or negligence of understanding the laws and or reading them or the regulations is truly no excuse. You are required to know that. You are required as a sportsman or sportswoman to read the regulations and know what's legal before you go out and recreate.
Sure. So there you go, folks. That's one that, and don't depend on, they're going to let me off, because these guys are good at figuring it out. Now let's get into hunting. We're well into archery season, and we're coming closer and closer to what I kind of refer to as Christmas Day for a lot of hunters, that general opening day of the general rifle season. What would you say is the most common mistake for hunters out there in Montana?
Yeah, with the landscape being so checkerboarded with private and public and all that, hunting without landowner permission, or what some people commonly call as a trespass violation, is really, really common. The other thing, like in western Montana, in a lot of areas, you can't shoot spike bull elk. That's a pretty common violation that people call themselves in a lot at. There's maybe shooting the wrong deer species in the wrong area or what have you. Especially with these hunting districts being different now and people are getting used to it. We've seen a few violations that probably wouldn't have happened in the past because some of the boundaries had changed and all that. So, but yeah, hunting without permission is definitely one of the most common, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And some of that can be a true mistake where they got a little off where they were going. They thought they were still on public and they ended up on private land and that. And so in that case, what happens there? Do they typically going to get a citation for that, or
usually we have to get a complaint from a landowner or know a landowner really well and know their expectations of how they want us to handle situations. But yeah, it varies. I mean, some landowners say, don't worry about it, just warn them. Some are pretty adamant that they want them cited because they've had issues in the past or whatever. But, nowadays with all these Onyx apps and, GPSs and cadastral layers and property ownership online, it's pretty hard to not know where you're at.
Right.
In Montana, to commit hunting without landowner permission, they don't have to have their land marked with no trespassing signs or orange, like the law says for criminal trespass. Hunting without landowner permission is different, and it doesn't have to be fenced or marked. And so people need to know that it is their responsibility to know where they're at while they're afield. And just because there isn't a fence there doesn't mean you're crossing a boundary somewhere.
Now, let's say I'm out hunting and I stick this bull with my arrow, and we're pretty close to private land, and be darned, before he drops dead, goes on to private land. What happens there? Yeah,
this actually occurs a lot with deer and elk. A lot of people push the limits boundary hunting. And as well as I, when you're archery hunting, the animal doesn't often just keel over right there. Yeah. Especially elk, they can go a long ways. And so typically what will happen is the hunter will either call and say, hey, this happened, or they'll try to find a landowner. And sometimes they'll just try to sneak in and sneak it off too. But you do have to have permission to retrieve that animal. Okay. And we do help facilitate that a fair amount, but we also can't spend a bunch of time for unethical, behavior, doing things like boundary hunting on a consistent basis. I mean, I understand if there are ways and something happens, but when you're consistently hunting a public versus private boundary, right on a fence line, and the animal goes on to private, it makes it hard to want to spend a bunch of effort to assist those folks because they're just kind of pushing the limits,
Yeah. And that's the thing is I know it's tempting because, elk are not stupid. And they know where that pressure is and where it's not. And so they may gravitate towards there. But to say, okay, I'm going to go along this fence line because sooner or later one's going to step over. It's just not a good idea to hunt that way, is it?
No, it's not. It causes a lot of issues, especially with the landowners, because they get, often just frustrated with hunters doing that because the animals end up on their property, and then they got to spend part of their day dealing with the situation. And in Montana, by law, they technically don't have to let that hunter come on. That animal can sit there and rot, which is unfortunate. But there are some landowners that get to that point of frustration where they're just so sick of it, they just say, no, they can't come in. Again, we try to help facilitate those situations to where that doesn't happen as much as we can. But it can be quite frustrating because you can spend hours and hours on some of these situations when they could have been avoided if, the person had just been, 300-400 yards from the boundary instead of, 10 yards from the boundary.
Right. Yeah. It's knowing when to take that shot. If you're right along the fence line, the odds are they could go that way. So just don't take the shot, no matter how tempting it is. What would you say is the best way to approach a landowner and get permission? Because this is one, and those of you that listen to this podcast a lot, I kind of harp on this a lot. I grew up on a cattle ranch, and my dad was one of those landowners who eventually said no hunting on my land at all. And the whole reason he went to that was because became a constant thing that people were not asking for permission. They were asking for permission after the fact. on and on and on. And he just got frustrated. And he just said, you know what? I'm just not going to allow any hunting. Had these hunters not pulled all these little shenanigans, our land probably would have always been open if people just would have honestly came up. What do you recommend? How should you approach a landowner?
Growing up, I had the fortunate opportunity to know a good man that had a ranch between Livingston and Bozeman, and he was a family friend. However, we helped calve, we helped fence, we helped buck bales in the summer in 100-degree heat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, building those relationships is very important. You often become really good friends with people you get permission from, and you don't see as much of that these days. I don't know why. I think just the days of instant gratification are upon us as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask at the last minute, even if you're not good friends with these landowners. Don't ask the day before hunting season. Start talking to them months in advance. See if they need help around the ranch or the farm or what have you. There's lots of different ways you can ask, and it doesn't hurt to ask. All they can do is say no.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not always going to get permission, but using some tact in your approach to these landowners and assuring them, you're an ethical hunter, you're a law abider, and offer to help.
Yeah.
On their land. That's a big thing.
Yeah. And not only offering to help, because I should give that one exception that my dad always did. And that was anybody that worked the irrigation crew, changing pipe or bucking bales. Yeah. If you worked for him, no problem. You could hunt on the land. And, looking back on it, it was pretty smart of Dad, because we never had a shortage of people that wanted, because we had, a lot of acreage. We ran over 2,000 head of cattle. So we never had a shortage of people that wanted to buck bales and change pipe, because they all wanted to hunt. So, yeah, that certainly is a great way to do it. It's also not a bad way for your kids to learn some good old-fashioned elbow grease work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's how I grew up doing it.
Mm-hmm. So, great tip there. Now let's talk a little bit about some of these rules. One in particular, before we even started doing this podcast, I was talking about, we got into a discussion with a lot of our listeners about this stepping on private land to get to public land. And a lot of people, and I was surprised how many people said, well, no, that's kind of a gray area. And even to the point that some of them said, nope, that was decided. You can do that in Montana now because of the Wyoming case. Clarify that for me.
Yeah, so my understanding is that federal judge, that was decided only for Wyoming. Right. I mean, you would have to go up into the courts farther, even up to the Supreme Court, before, it could be across the board national thing. In Montana, our legal outfit is basically still considering corner crossing as unlawful. So if you're trying to corner cross from one piece of Forest Service to another, I mean, generally there's fences there. You're going to have to touch part of a fence of another landowner or what have you. And so it is still considered unlawful in Montana to corner cross.
And it doesn't have to be posted as such. You can't do it without permission.
Correct.
Okay. Because that actually even got reported on I'm trying to think. There was a couple talk shows that just had it wrong and said, no, that Wyoming case decided it does not, period, full stop, end of deal. In Montana, you can't corner cross without permission.
That is the legal stance in Montana.
Okay. So there you have it, folks. So again, this gets back to planning your hunt and just knowing where you're at, where you're going. Let's talk a bit about another one that I guess I've heard it, maybe because it's just kind of an interesting thing to talk about. I don't know how common it is, but where in rifle season, I shoot an animal and somebody else shot it same time or pretty close. Wounded the animal, I'm tracking it. Now somebody else takes it down. How does that go? Who decides who gets the animal?
Well, usually the one that wins the fight, maybe. I don't know. Because we have had some fist fights over critters.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
You know, typically how I handle those is basically in Montana, the law, reads as whoever kills that animal has to tag it. And so whoever shoots it last should technically be the one to tag it, whoever puts the kill shot on it. The problem is some of these are, close together, and who's to say that first shot wasn't going to kill the animal, but they shot it again. But yeah, our stance is whoever puts the kill shot on the animal is the one that's going to tag it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that one gets interesting. When you get to that dispute, and this is where it gets a little hairy, folks, is because you're armed and so is the other guy. And yes, tempers can fly, especially as we get a little closer to the end of the season and you haven't got your animal yet. How best to settle that dispute if you come across that dispute? Should we call one of you at this point and say, okay, let's let the warden decide? Or
yeah, I mean, I didn't become a game warden to play psychologist or anything.
Or be the judge too.
Yeah. But we do get called to these situations a lot. I mean, of course, being a wildlife related incident, they're going to call us, right?
Mm-hmm, sure.
And so we've dealt with a lot of these over the years. And yeah, the party that doesn't get to tag it might go away upset. And, sometimes that's just the way it is. I've had numerous situations where, the first party that shot it might have shot it in an area where, of course, the thing's going to run for miles before it dies or live for days. And, the second person that put the kill shot on it, they were told to tag it. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, if you're going to be out there hunting, yeah, things happen, but you got to make sure you got some good shot placement. And if you're just winging bullets and breaking legs and stuff, you can't be expected to be the one that gets to tag an animal that somebody else shot and killed just because you wounded it. Typically, that's more of what we see is somebody that just was shooting from 500-600 yards and, wounding the animal. And then somebody actually makes a good, clean, ethical shot and takes the animal down. So a lot of times it's their own fault to begin with.
Sure. Yeah. And again, that's back to, go back to some of your old hunter safety manuals and some of those things and really get back into to understanding that because, again, you guys have so many different irons in the fire out there at any given time as a warden. That it's really too bad when you have to step in and spend a lot of time on one of these issues, which you will do, but you'd rather continue on doing what are the main things that wardens do.
Yeah, I mean, it's typically not necessarily a violation or enforcement action situation. We're literally playing counselor to two parties that are trying to settle a deal. And it can get kind of cumbersome and tempers can flare, but more often than not, if you just, explain the situation and explain maybe some, ethical mistakes that happen, a lot of times people can maybe eventually at least concede that, okay, I'll deal with this, but I mean, there's times where you just can't make everybody happy. It's just not going to happen all the time.
Another question that we get a lot is on the new technology that's out there, talking about these e-tags and things like that. What's your thought on those? Do you like the new technology now where you can carry your basically your tag within your My FWP app and all that? Has that helped you as a warden, or has it caused more issues?
I mean, there was some glitches to start, with regards to some glitches in the app and pulling up the licenses and different things. In particular, when we're checking fishing license, you're checking 60, 70 people sometimes in a day, and it takes 10 minutes for them to pull it up. But people have gotten used to using it. And it's quite handy to not have to pull out a piece of paper, unfold it, look at everything, fold it back up, put it back in their pouch. I mean, they can just pull it up on their phone. I can look at it. We're done. The downside to that is a few phones have been dropped in some water.
I didn't think about that.
Ice fishing, we've had people lose their phone down a hole, things like that. So, but there's pros and cons to everything. The paper tags, they get bloody or wet, they kind of dissolve and get ruined. The e-tag, well, if you weren't signed into the app before you went out of service and had all your stuff downloaded, you're not going to be able to validate a tag electronically. So there's pros and cons to both. I think it'll only get better as people learn how to use it and make sure, they understand all these little, intricacies and stuff. I really have no opinion either way. I mean, as long as somebody has a valid license and it's validated properly, as far as I'm concerned, we're good to go.
Yeah. And the main thing, folks out there that are listening, is make sure you get that stuff downloaded into your app, because Montana, we have a lot of places that don't have cell service. You got to have all that. So what happens when we're in an area, let's say over in near Fort Peck, where we're hunting out in the Missouri Breaks, and we got an animal down, and I'm ready to validate my deal, but I go, oh, gee, I didn't actually download it into my app, and I don't have cell service. You come upon me and say, hey, let's see your tag. What happens there? What do we do?
Well, I mean, if you didn't have service to call, and
Right.
say, hey, Mr. Game Warden or Mrs. Game Warden, I forgot to download my tags or whatever. What do I do? And we would just more than likely instruct you to gut it, take care of the meat so nothing spoils, and say, hey, get into some service and make sure you get that done, immediately. And tell me when you're done so I can look it up and make sure it's done. Because we understand with this new technology, there's going to be some quirky mistakes happen. And we see people that even forget their paper tags.
Yeah.
And so, but with this being, you need cell phone service. Yeah. Just make sure, download, make sure everything's there. We can check it in the field. If you can validate it, once you hit validate, we can check it right on your phone, that it was validated. And then when we get back into service, we can double check in the system that we have, because we can see your e-tags and which ones were validated and which ones weren't. It's got a date stamp and all that. So, so we know when it gets done.
Right. So, again, know the technology, understand it before you get out of service, know what to do with it and all that, and save us all a lot of time and headache out there. So what would be some of the more common, or I shouldn't say more common, we've kind of covered that, but some of the least common, some of those mistakes that maybe are happening out there that people just maybe never have heard of? What do you run across there? Is there anything that has come up now that is starting to become a common mistake that wasn't, say, a few years ago?
I can't really necessarily think of anything that's come up lately. I mean, some of the least common things aren't mistakes. They're intentional. But that's the small percentage of hunters and anglers outdoing intentional harm to the resources, whether it be on large scale killings of deer and elk, kind of like, what was in the news recently with that case on the other side of the state where it was like, I can't remember, 7 elk and 4 or 5 deer and a couple antelope working across state lines with multiple agencies. We know those go on. but sometimes it takes years to complete those investigations, and sometimes they're harder to come by. But with the Titmon hotline and people giving information, it's helped us, make some of those cases where people are doing intentional harm. But yeah, as far as ticket numbers go and the number of citations we issue, those types of cases are a smaller percentage of the actual citations.
And that's the next place I was going to go, is in that the criminal side of it. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to take another quick break here. But when we come back, I want to talk about, one, the criminal side. Are we seeing more poaching? Is it more going up or not? And then talk about some of the tools that you guys use out in the field to solve some of these. So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll address that and then wrap it up here right after this. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this podcast. You folks really make the difference here for us by tuning in. But we could not do what we do at all without great sponsors like Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Now, let me kind of fill you in on what's going on there with everybody. They have so many great things. For example, they have extraordinary flooring lines. Now, a lot of their flooring is made right there. They have this huge lumber yard full of all kinds of stuff. You just got to go see it in Missoula. You can go online and take a look at all the different flooring and that. But John and Corey and the rest of the gang, Superior Hardwoods, they've been in business since 1977. You don't stay in business that long by not doing it right. Go online to superior-hardwoods.com, and you can even read the reviews from everybody. You'll get a feel that these guys really know what they're doing. They strive so hard to make sure their customers are satisfied and get what they want. So back to the flooring. Go take a look at all the different things that they can do at Superior Hardwoods. Everything from flooring that will just blow you away, and that I guarantee they have flooring in there with woods you've probably never even seen before. Then you can even go into things that can accent that. You have got to see the alder molding they have there. Unbelievable. The list goes on and on. So go to Superior Hardwoods. That's superior-hardwoods.com. Take a look at what they've got going on there online. Then you have questions. Easy. Just give them a call, 406-251-2272. Or if you want, and I think you'll love going to the showroom, it's at 5120 Highway 93 South there in Missoula. I have just talked to so many people that go, you were talking on your podcast about these guys. Well, then we went, and you weren't exaggerating, Downrigger. I mean, this place is amazing, and they know so much about it. As we like to put it, they will guide you through the woods at Superior Hardwoods of Montana. You got to go see them. Superior Hardwoods of Montana. That's superior-hardwoods.com. Oh, you're going to like these folks. You're going to love the way your house is going to look when they get done with it. Go see them. And we're back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast. I'm talking with Sergeant Aaron Berg, Warden for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And Aaron, one, thanks so much for spending so much time with me here. This has really been an interesting discussion. But let's get into the criminal side, because as Montana becomes more and more popular, we're seeing a pretty good influx of people moving into Montana now. We're kind of getting on the map on some of this stuff, from whether people are watching the popular Yellowstone TV series or that. More and more knowing about it. Are we seeing more actual criminal intended I'm going to be a poacher? Are we seeing more of that in the state of Montana?
I mean, after, I guess, COVID and everything, we're still seeing an influx of people, but I can't say that there's been a huge increase of like intentional criminal poaching or illegal commercial activities or anything like that. But they're everywhere. They're in every community all over Montana. And if you're there, we're eventually going to hear about you and we're going to find you. I mean, we have like I said, we have the Titmon hotline. We have, methods of surveillance and different things. And I don't want to divulge too many secrets.
Yeah, I understand that.
But yeah, we do have some tools to figure out what's going on. And like I said, sometimes we may not catch them right away. It might be a multi-year, ordeal, but eventually you're going to get caught. It's all over ego and greed and all that, with a lot of these, big time criminal situations. So, I mean, eventually it's going to catch up to you.
One of the things that amazed me as I started learning about this stuff was that some of these trophy mounts and things like that, they go for amazing amounts of money. And that kind of, put the light bulb over my head. Well, okay, that's why these people are going to risk even potentially going to prison, is that money thing allures them. How do you guys, and again, you can't tell me all your stuff, but how do you solve a crime that happened out in the outdoors before you even get to investigate it? We may have had weather and all kinds of things disturb the crime scene. How do you do that? How do you solve something like that?
Well, I mean, a lot of times we may have like been on the scene, but just didn't know, what activity was going on. For sure. We may have, just had a gut pile or some blood spots or what have you. And I mean, we use DNA just like any other law enforcement agency does to catch a violent criminal that did a violent act. I mean, we use DNA. Matter of fact, I think we had one case when the current Lincoln game warden, Ezra Schwalm, came back to Missoula from working out in eastern Montana, made a case up in that Helmville area, and I believe we submitted, it was like 58 pieces of DNA evidence.
Wow.
There was...
Now you're talking human DNA?
No,
animal.
Animal.
Okay.
And so, like the clothing they wore, their boots, there was like 6 or 7 illegal animals. There was some moose and some elk and some deer involved that they shot. And we were able to determine which individual was at the moose kill, which one was at this elk kill and this elk kill. And so it specified who was at what kill sites, because they had that blood, evidence on their boots and clothes.
So I didn't even think about that. I don't know why I didn't think about that, but yeah, animals have DNA too. So are a lot of criminals not thinking about that, oh, well, they didn't see me do it, so they're never going to find out? Or are most of them pretty savvy that I got to clean all my stuff up and try to clean up the scene of the crime? I mean, are most of these people really stupid, or you run across some pretty smart criminals? Yeah,
there are definitely some savvy criminals out there, but yeah, I mean, it's so hard to clean up that mess, when you're outdoors or what have you, or, I mean, you have meat in your freezer that we may end up, doing a search on and obtaining DNA to match, or the antlers. I mean, there's a number of ways, hair, there's a number of ways you can match all that, to an animal, whether it be from a kill site to an actual part of an animal that the person has in possession. And we've used human DNA as well. People have cut themselves on a knife, or we had a fire that was started on one of our wildlife management areas, where a human was smoking a cigarette and shooting exploding targets and caused a wildfire. So the DNA from the cigarette butt was used to find the guy. We also had a case down the Bitterroot where we used a cigarette butt from the site of where someone shot an elk on private property, trespassed. And we used that DNA to prove that that person was at that location as well. Ballistic evidence, lands and grooves in rifles, markings on the bullet, we can match all that stuff from brass where it goes into the barrel. There's all kinds of distinctive ballistic fingerprints that you can look at.
So just like the CSI stuff that we think about, you guys are using all that same kind of stuff
on a regular basis.
Wow. That's fascinating. How about as far as the animals themselves? Because one last area I want to get into is one that is getting more and more noticeable, and that is the grizzly bear. I don't think it's just me. Maybe it is, but it just seems like we're seeing more and more human-bear conflicts. Is that on the rise big time in Montana?
Yeah, it seems like the last few years it's really started to increase. For years, the bears have, been expanding between our two, what we call our two ecosystems between the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, typically known as Glacier, and the Yellowstone ecosystem, Yellowstone Park. But now bears are moving out of both of those ecosystems and intermingling in, west central Montana. There's lots of subadults moving around, finding new territory. We're seeing them in areas that we haven't seen them in, decades, at least commonly. But now it seems like it is more common. And we're talking, in and around towns like Missoula. We've had one within just a mile or two of the town limits. Actually, more
grizzly bear.
Yeah, more than one. So people need to be aware, for sure. Not just when out hunting, even when they're just out recreating at these trailheads and stuff. You got to know that pretty much all of western Montana and the eastern front around Augusta and Choteau and all that is full of grizzly bears, and you just got to expect to see one eventually.
Yeah, well, grizzly bears have now, they've been noticed in Billings. As far east there. So, and I know if you're a regular listener to this podcast, I've done, several bear-aware podcasts, and now you can see why this is becoming such a big deal. So, grizzly bears are, and I've had the misfortune of coming in contact with them a few times. Growing up on the ranch, we had a few that decided that calves were a pretty good way to get some protein, and that becomes bears are protected. The grizzly bear is protected. It almost is like you're murdering somebody. You got to be careful there. When is it okay to say and some of this happens so quick to say, I've got to kill this bear?
Yeah, of course, the most common situation that arises is when they're being charged or attacked. That's totally, the most common. Anything, beyond that, you really got to be careful because they are still on the list.
Right.
And, they have not been delisted. Montana has been asking for state management for some time, and we're hoping eventually that will happen. But yeah, with the expansion of the bears and where they're at now, it's just these conflicts are becoming so common. And again, it's mostly interaction as far as either defensive or predatory attacks. And that's where we see most of these bears getting euthanized, either by us or by whoever is being charged or attacked. So,
and that becomes not only a state thing, but that's a federal thing too. So, is that a citation that you're going to write? And here's a scenario that can happen, and I think we're going to hear more of it. I'm a hunter. I get this bull elk I've always dreamed of. I got him down. I'm going up, and now the grizzly bear comes onto my kill site. And by golly, he's not going to take my animal. You cannot shoot that grizzly bear to save your animal.
No. Anytime there's a death of a grizzly bear, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to be checking it out. And there needs to be a legit reason. And that is not a legit reason. I mean, if you're hunting in grizzly bear country, you got to be expected and held to a little higher standard to get that animal out quicker so that, bears aren't getting on those kills and taking them away from you. If that does happen, you just need to either call the Fish and Wildlife Service or call us. We can contact our local agent if they're around and see what needs done regarding the situation.
Can we get a new tag if that happens?
It depends on the situation, maybe how long the animal's been out there, the care of the animal it was taken, did you quarter it? Did you hang it? I mean, all that kind of stuff,
So if you made a lot of attempts to do the right thing and still got it, that might happen. Don't depend on it, but it might happen.
It could happen, yes.
Okay. If you folks want to know a little bit more about that, if you go back to just my last Bear Aware podcast, I talk with Danielle Euler about this, and she gives some pretty good tips about when you're in grizzly country. And really anywhere, you need to get your animal up and move. But if you're in grizzly country, you're in grizzly country, get that animal up and out now. Don't dilly-dally around.
Yep. And when you do go back to the kill site or where you hung it or whatever you did, you need to go in with the understanding that you need to be really hypervigilant of the surroundings, because if a bear has fed on that, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be on the animal. They'll daybed after feasting, and they'll go just nearby and lay down, and you could surprise that animal. Oftentimes you'll see, grass or dirt that like it was tried to get covered up. If it's still on the ground, that's indicative of a cache. And so you want to make sure you're looking for those signs. And oftentimes bears will have an odor about them too that are a little off. And so you want to be using your eyes and your ears and your nose when you go in. Yeah.
Danielle even had a great point of putting a stick in with tie a little flag or something on it right into the carcass. So as you approach from a distance, if you don't see that anymore, odds are that a bear has disturbed that, because if you've put it in there good, it's probably not a wolf or something like that. It could be, but that's a good indication that you better approach with some extreme caution, because they get real protective of their food.
Yeah, especially in the fall when they're in hyperphagia, and they're trying to fatten up
like
for winter.
Right now.
yeah, it's of high priority for them, and so they're not just going to let something like that go, because that's a pretty good meal for them before they go take their nap.
Now, do you see a lot of problems where, because we are allowed to hunt black bear in Montana, where people are mistaking grizzly for black bear and shooting a grizzly bear instead of thinking it was a black bear?
Yeah, it's not super common, but it does happen from time to time. Sometimes, especially on some of those smaller female grizzlies, somebody might mistake it for a brown-faced black bear.
Sure.
But, if you got a big enough bear, it's usually pretty obvious, what's going on there with the...
There's a lot of great information on how to identify them, but let's say you do make that mistake. Is that completely out of your hands? You got to contact the federal boys and they make that decision at that point?
Anytime there's the death of a grizzly bear, the feds get involved. And like I said, we try to get a hold of the agent. I mean, they're welcome to call our Tipmont hotline. We can help facilitate that communication with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Sometimes they're not around and they ask us to do a quick investigation and see, what went on. Was it really a defensive shooting where they were being attacked, or it was an accident. They thought it was a black bear, but it was actually a grizzly bear. And
so what's the best thing to do if we make that, which is a big mistake? If we make that mistake, obviously you should come clean and say, but what's going to happen?
Well, again, that's up to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If it's an unintentional shooting of a grizzly bear, it could go both ways. You could still get a citation or not. That's up to them. Like I said earlier, it depends on every situation. I mean, is it obviously a grizzly bear, or could you look at that and say, okay, from, a few hundred yards, I could see how they mistook that or whatever. So, you got to have the totality of the circumstances before you make a decision on what the end all is.
Mm-hmm. So again, bear hunters know how to tell the difference and that. And then for those of you just out recreating in that, we got a lot of grizzlies. So just be super careful.
Yeah, and that's why you got to take the bear ID test before you can buy a bear license in Montana, so that we can show that you at least mostly know the difference. I think you can miss a couple.
Yeah, but yeah, and the thing is, don't just study for it one time and that. I mean, really know it, because this can be really expensive.
Yeah, their physical attributes are definitely different than a black bear, and if you do any research online, you can tell the difference.
But it can cost you. It can cost you a lot.
It can.
Yeah.
But making the call is the right way to go, and that shows that, hey, I made a mistake.
And overall, that for anything that's a violation that you really didn't intend to, but you did, usually it's going to be your fault. But it always is going to go better for them if they contact you first and say, I blew it here, guys. I made a big mistake. Absolutely.
That shows some character, and that you're not afraid of the consequences for your mistake. And, more often than not, we'll maybe look at some different routes if you do call yourself in.
And lastly, and then I'll let you go, Aaron, because you've taken a lot of your time here, is how well does this Tipmont thing work? Is it helping you guys out a lot?
Oh, yeah. When that Tipmont hotline first started,
it was back, in the early 80s, right?
Something like that, yeah. We got so many more tips and started making a lot more cases. People were turning people in and giving information, and those tips are, we rely on that Tipmont hotline. One, for people who call in tips of violations or criminal activity. Two, so that people have a way to get a hold of us if they make a mistake and they want to turn themselves in. That way they have an avenue to do that.
Okay, so that's a good way to turn yourself in.
Yes.
And what's that number again?
1-800-TIP-MONT. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and in a lot of districts, wardens have been there so long. A lot of people in their community have their phone number directly too. But yeah, that Tipmont hotline has been tremendous.
And for those of you listening, use it. Turn people in when you see it and you know it, because that game is ours, all of ours. And when people are out there breaking the law, the sooner we get them the heck out of here, the better. For all of us. So use it. And it is anonymous, right?
It can be, yeah. Anonymous or confidential. Yep, absolutely.
So, yeah, I hope all of you do that. Anything else, Aaron, that you want to let people know about as a game warden here in Montana?
Yeah, just, if you're in Montana, just respect the resource. It is a resource that belongs to the people that live here, and no matter whether you live here or you don't have to break the law to go out and have fun and harvest some animals. You win some, you lose some. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not.
Right.
But breaking the law isn't an excuse to make yourself look good or whatever. So come and enjoy, but respect our resources as well.
And folks, let me tell you, these guys, all these wardens, are very approachable. So, go ahead and contact them and don't be intimidated. They're good people, and they're just trying to make this great for all of us. So, Aaron, I want to thank you for your service to the state of Montana and to protecting our great resource out there. And I hope you can come back and talk to us again soon and keep us filled in.
I'd be glad to come back.
All right. Be safe out there.
Thank you.
There's Aaron Berg. great game warden, a good friend of this program. And if you have questions for Aaron or really any of the game wardens in the state of Montana, email me. Manny will give my email again real quick, but it's downrigger@montanooutdoor.com. Real simple, downrigger@montanooutdoor.com. Just send me an email. I'll get a hold of Aaron, and he'll say, yep, I can answer that one, or no, let's send it up the chain, and we'll get you an answer on any of this stuff right away for you as quick as we can, so that you keep enjoying the great state of Montana and all that it has to offer out there. And if you are interested in becoming a game warden, they'd love to have you if you're the right fit. And I'll have some links in the podcast description here for you. Just go back to that podcast description, click on those, you can learn all about it, and hopefully you can get started in a great career like Aaron has. That's it for now, folks. Take care out there, be safe, and enjoy Montana's great outdoors.
Thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast. It has been brought to you in part by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. And by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. So what did you think of today's podcast? Send your questions and comments to downrigger@montanooutdoor.com. We should be dropping a new podcast this next Saturday. Until then, we will see you soon out in Montana's great outdoors.